Imagine waking up one morning to a letter that could change your life, or at least your front yard forever. That's exactly what happened to me. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, sent me a notice saying I had to remove the gate I had just installed in front of my house. Their reason: community access. They insisted my gate was disrupting the neighborhood's flow. I was furious, confused, and determined not to just comply blindly. Let me take you back to where it all began. I live in a quiet, friendly neighborhood, a place where life feels calm and predictable. It's the kind of neighborhood where mornings start with the soft sound of birds, and afternoons are filled with the laughter of children playing outside. Kids ride their bikes freely up and down the streets, stopping occasionally to chat with neighbors or offer a friendly hello. The sidewalks are lined with well-kept lawns, and there's a certain warmth in the air that makes you feel at home the moment you pull into the driveway. People wave at each other when walking their dogs. Neighbors borrow sugar without a second thought, and there's a sense of security here that you just can't find everywhere. I had always loved the feeling of community, the way everyone looked out for each other. It's the kind of place where you leave your doors unlocked and your kids roam freely, because trust, respect, and care are woven into the very fabric of the neighborhood. Despite all of that, there had always been one thing that made me a little uneasy. Our street, although friendly, wasn't exactly the safest when it came to security. Occasionally, there were reports of people unfamiliar with the neighborhood walking through, sometimes peering into houses or testing doors. While nothing serious ever happened, it was enough to make me think about how I could better protect my family and our home. I started researching different ways to improve safety without making the house feel like a fortress. That's when I stumbled upon the idea of installing a gate, something that would provide both security and a sense of privacy, while still fitting in aesthetically with the neighborhood. After weeks of planning, I finally decided on a sturdy iron gate. I chose a design that wasn't just functional but elegant, a gate that would complement the style of my home while serving a practical purpose. It was tall enough to deter unwanted visitors, but not so imposing that it made the house feel unwelcoming. The ironwork was detailed and artistic, giving the entrance a sophisticated, almost regal appearance. I could already imagine how it would look in the morning sunlight, casting beautiful shadows across the driveway. The installation process itself was exciting. I worked closely with the company, discussing every detail, from the height of the gate to the type of latch and the style of the posts. By the time it was finished, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was hard to describe. My house, which had always been charming, now looked even more refined, more secure, and more personal. The day the gate was installed was one of the happiest days for my family. We stood back and admired the work, imagining our lives with this added layer of safety. I thought about my kids playing in the yard, without me worrying about strangers walking through the driveway. I thought about quiet evenings, when I could leave the doors open without fear. It felt like a tangible layer of protection, something that would give us peace of mind and make our home feel complete. I even invited a few neighbors over to see it, and they were impressed, praising the craftsmanship and the way it enhanced the property. For me, it was a dream come true. It was more than a gate. It was a symbol of care, thoughtfulness, and the desire to create a safe, happy environment for my family. But apparently, not everyone shared my excitement. Shortly after the installation, a letter arrived from the HOA. I remember the feeling of anticipation quickly turning into a pit in my stomach as I opened the envelope. Inside was an official notice, carefully worded but unmistakably firm. The letter claimed that my gate violated HOA rules and had to be removed immediately. The reason cited was community access, implying that the gate somehow interfered with the neighborhood's shared space. At first, I couldn't believe what I was reading. How could something that improved safety and aesthetics be seen as a problem? It felt unfair, frustrating, and completely arbitrary. I reread the letter several times, hoping I had misunderstood, but each reading confirmed the same thing. They wanted my gate gone. The emotions that followed were a mix of anger, disbelief, and confusion. I felt as though someone was trying to take away a piece of my home, a piece of security that my family deserved. The gate wasn't just metal and bolts. It represented countless hours of planning, thought, and investment. It symbolized my care for my family and my home. And now, This letter from the HOA threatened to erase all of that effort, suggesting that my personal property could be dictated not by common sense or fairness, but by rules that seemed disconnected from reality. I thought about my options. Could I just remove the gate to avoid conflict? I could, but it felt wrong. The idea of tearing down something that made my home safer and more beautiful felt like conceding to an unfair system. On the other hand, ignoring the notice could result in fines or even legal action. It was a classic David versus Goliath moment, me and my gate versus the HOA and their rigid rules. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about metal and locks. It was about standing up for what I believed was right. My family's safety, the integrity of our home, and the pride I took in my property were worth defending. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this letter dictate my life. I wasn't going to tear down the gate. Instead, I started thinking creatively, wondering how I could satisfy the HOA's demand for community access without sacrificing security or aesthetics. I realized that there had to be a solution, something that would respect the rules, but also honor my family's needs. And that's when I started planning the next step, the upgrade that would turn a conflict into an opportunity, and ultimately, a victory. Little did I know, this decision would set off a chain of events that tested my patience, creativity, and determination in ways I never imagined. What started as a simple gate installation had become a journey into negotiation, strategy, and problem solving, all while protecting the home I loved. One Tuesday morning, I went to check the mailbox as usual. The sun was barely up, casting a soft golden glow over the quiet street. Birds were chirping, neighbors were starting to take their morning walks, and everything seemed calm and ordinary. I spotted a crisp, official-looking envelope tucked between the usual bills and flyers. At first glance, it looked like any other piece of mail, but something about it made my heart skip a beat. The envelope had the HOA's official logo at the top, and the paper inside felt heavier than a standard letter. I didn't even know what I was expecting, but there was this sudden, inexplicable tension in my chest as I slid it open. I unfolded the letter slowly, my eyes scanning the first few lines, and then I froze. The words hit me like a punch. Your gate obstructs community access and must be removed immediately. Failure to comply may result in fines. I blinked, read it again, and then again, thinking that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, the words were clear, bold, and absolute. My beautiful new gate, the one I had spent weeks meticulously planning and paying for, was suddenly a problem. The letter wasn't just a suggestion, it was an ultimatum. At that moment, my heart sank. I felt an overwhelming mix of disbelief and frustration. I had followed every guideline I thought was required when installing the gate. I had checked with contractors, looked up local regulations, and ensured that everything was within the HOA's general rules. Yet here I was, being told that something I had poured time, money, and effort into was now suddenly wrong. The letter was threatening fines, thousands of dollars if I didn't comply. I remember feeling a cold wave of panic wash over me. That gate wasn't just a gate. It was a symbol of safety and pride. And now, it seemed, the HOA had the power to strip it away with the stroke of a pen. I sat down on the edge of the porch, letter in hand, and tried to process it. My mind was racing. I thought about the time I had spent choosing the perfect ironwork, the evenings spent coordinating with the installers, the weekends I had dedicated to preparing the area for the gate. Every small detail mattered to me. The way the sunlight hit the wrought iron in the morning, the satisfying click of the lock, the subtle aesthetic it added to the house. And now, in one cold, official statement, it all felt like it could be taken away. The unfairness of it stung, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of helplessness that I had never imagined feeling in my own home. I couldn't believe it at first. How could a gate that improved the property's safety and aesthetic appeal be labeled a violation? How could the HOA, an organization that was supposed to serve the community's best interests, dictate something that seemed so personal, so reasonable to me? I felt a mix of anger and incredulity. I imagined the HOA board members sitting in their air-conditioned offices, completely unaware of the hours, effort, and thought that went into something like this. I wondered how many other residents had faced similar arbitrary demands and how they dealt with it. Was I supposed to just tear it down and comply? silently absorbing the financial and emotional cost? Or was there another way to handle this situation? I reread the letter multiple times, each reading amplifying the mix of emotions swirling inside me. They mentioned community access, as if it were some kind of universal principle that outweighed my family's safety. It was vague, almost ridiculous. What did community access even mean in this context? Our street was wide enough for everyone to come and go, and no one had complained about visiting my home or accessing the neighborhood. I felt a surge of frustration at the ambiguity of it. The letter provided no room for negotiation, no acknowledgement of my efforts to comply with community standards, just an absolute demand. Remove the gate or face the consequences. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing mind, the financial implications started to weigh on me. Thousands of dollars in fines for something I believed was entirely justified? That could devastate our family budget. My mind ran through every possible scenario, paying the fine reluctantly, trying to fight it legally, or removing the gate and watching my hard work vanish in a day. None of these options felt right. I wanted a solution that respected both my rights as a homeowner and the safety of my family. But I also realized that dealing with the HOA would require patience, strategy, and perhaps a little creativity. I thought about my family. The gate wasn't just an aesthetic choice. It was about security. It was about keeping my children safe while they played in the yard and ensuring that our home remained a private, secure space. Removing it would strip away that sense of protection, and I couldn't accept that lightly. I started jotting down ideas, thinking through ways to satisfy the HOA's vague demands without compromising the gate's purpose. Maybe I could allow selective access. Perhaps there was a technology solution to make the gate more community-friendly without sacrificing safety. The more I considered it, the more I realized that there might be a way to turn this seemingly impossible situation into an opportunity to show that compromise and innovation could coexist. And that's when a spark of determination ignited within me. I would not tear down the gate without a fight. I would not let this letter define the limits of what I could do on my own property. If the HOA wanted community access, I would give them access, but on terms that made sense, terms that respected both my rights and the needs of my family. What initially felt like a nightmare was quickly transforming into a challenge that I was determined to tackle head-on. And I knew, deep down, that this was the moment where I had to decide whether to give up or to fight smart. Little did I know, that envelope in my mailbox would be the start of a journey that would test my patience, creativity, and resolve in ways I had never imagined. It wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about standing up for what I believed was right, negotiating with authority, and finding a solution that everyone could accept. At first, I panicked. I felt my chest tighten, my mind spinning, and a heavy sense of dread settle over me like a storm cloud. The thought of having to take down the gate I had poured so much time, effort, and money into felt crushing. Who wants a ticking financial time bomb looming over their heads? The HOA's letter wasn't just a suggestion, it was a threat, and the potential fines could wipe out months of savings. For a moment, I imagined myself tearing down the gate, watching all that hard work disappear, and feeling utterly powerless. It was tempting to just comply, to avoid the confrontation, to choose the path of least resistance. After all, nobody wants unnecessary stress, right? But then, as I sat there staring at the elegant iron gate, a thought struck me. This was my property, my home, my sanctuary. I had spent weeks researching, planning, and executing every detail to make the gate not just functional but beautiful. I had made sure it followed all the local regulations, double-checked with the installers, and invested both money and sweat equity into creating something that added value to my family's safety and our peace of mind. And now, I was being told to undo it because of some arbitrary rule labeled as community access. Something inside me stirred. I realized that giving in wouldn't just cost me money. It would cost me pride. It would send the message that I could be pushed around. And worst of all, it would take away the sense of security I had worked so hard to provide for my family. I leaned against the porch railing, letting the morning sun warm my face, and tried to think logically. The gate wasn't an obstruction in the traditional sense. It didn't block any roads, sidewalks, or communal spaces. Neighbors could still come and go. Visitors could still enter if needed. The term community access was vague and, frankly, open to interpretation. Why should an organization of adults, some of whom I barely knew, have the power to dictate what I could and couldn't do in my own yard? The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. I had followed the rules. I had checked with the HOA guidelines before installing the gate. I had respected the neighborhood's aesthetic. Yet here I was, facing a letter that felt both arbitrary and authoritarian. Then another thought hit me. This wasn't just about a gate. It was about standing up for what I believed in. It was about asserting my right to make choices about my property and my family's safety. For years, I had lived peacefully, respecting HOA rules, helping neighbors, and contributing to the community. But this letter forced me to draw a line. I could either let fear dictate my actions, surrender, and erase weeks of hard work, or I could confront the situation, thoughtfully and creatively, and come out stronger. My panic slowly began to shift into determination. This wasn't just a challenge. It was an opportunity to stand up for myself, to show that rules should make sense, not strip away safety and common sense. I thought about my family, my children, running around the yard, playing games and laughing without a care in the world. My spouse, knowing that our home had just one more layer of protection, one more assurance that our lives were safe. Removing the gate wouldn't just undo weeks of effort. It would strip away that peace of mind. It would tell my family that arbitrary rules mattered more than their safety. That was unacceptable. And suddenly, fear was replaced with a stubborn resolve. I decided that this wasn't a fight I was going to lose by giving up. The next step was critical. I needed to find a solution that worked for both sides, or at the very least, make a statement that we would not be bullied into surrendering our rights. I started brainstorming, trying to figure out a way to satisfy the HOA's vague demands for community access without compromising the gate's purpose. Could I install a system that allowed controlled access for neighbors? Could I create a way for emergency services to enter without removing the gate entirely? Could I show that my gate actually enhanced the community by adding safety and aesthetics instead of reducing access? I began to see that perhaps the conflict wasn't a wall. It was a puzzle, one that could be solved with creativity, logic, and a little courage. In that moment, I realized something important. Fear and panic are natural, but they shouldn't dictate action. Panic leads to rash decisions, compliance, and regret. Determination, on the other hand, leads to strategy, solutions, and empowerment. The HOA's letter was meant to intimidate me, to make me feel powerless and small. But the truth was, I had the power to turn the situation around. I had the power to assert my rights respectfully, to negotiate, to innovate, and ultimately, to change the narrative. I wasn't just reacting. I was thinking ahead, planning a move that would not only protect my home, but also potentially set an example for other homeowners facing similar challenges. As I stood there, looking at the gate, I felt a shift in my mindset. I was no longer panicking. I was no longer imagining worst-case scenarios. Instead, I was strategizing. I began outlining possible solutions, imagining conversations with the HOA, and thinking about upgrades or modifications that could satisfy everyone. It wasn't going to be easy. Negotiating with an organization that wielded arbitrary power rarely is, but it felt possible. And for the first time since receiving that dreaded letter, I felt a sense of excitement. I wasn't just defending a gate. I was defending my principles, my family, and my right to make thoughtful, informed decisions about my own property. I took a deep breath, letting the morning air fill my lungs, and made a silent promise to myself. I would not tear down the gate. I would not let fear or intimidation dictate my actions. I would find a solution, creative, practical, and fair. And if that solution required going above and beyond, I was ready to do it. This was my property, my family, and my home. I wouldn't compromise on what mattered most. This moment, terrifying as it seemed at first, was shaping up to be the start of a journey where persistence, intelligence, and courage would prevail. By the end of that morning, I had moved past panic. I had shifted from fear to determination, from compliance to strategy. The challenge was clear, but so was my path forward. I wasn't just going to fight for a gate. I was going to fight for reason, fairness, and my family's security. And that decision, made quietly on my porch that morning, set the stage for everything that came next. The next week, I finally scheduled a meeting with the HOA board. Walking into that room felt like stepping into the ring, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were slightly shaking, not from fear alone, but from the adrenaline of facing a group of people who held the power to dictate what I could do on my own property. The boardroom itself was sterile, with a long polished table, stiff chairs, and walls adorned with framed neighborhood regulations and rules. It felt almost designed to intimidate, as if every detail whispered, "We hold the authority here, and you're just a resident." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and reminded myself why I was here. This gate was more than just an entrance to my property. It was my family's safety net, a reflection of my taste and effort, and an improvement that added value to the house. I had a responsibility to defend it, and more importantly, to ensure that my family remained secure. With that in mind, I walked to my seat at the table and looked around at the faces of the board members. Some were elderly, others middle-aged. Some wore business suits, others more casual attire. There was a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and perhaps even subtle annoyance on their faces. I began speaking, my voice firm but calm, trying to convey the thoughtfulness behind my decision. I explained, point by point, why the gate was necessary: security for my family, aesthetic improvement, and the increase in property value that the installation provided. I emphasized that it wasn't an attempt to exclude the neighborhood or ignore the community rules, but a carefully considered enhancement that respected the spirit of the community while ensuring my family's safety. I even referenced the neighborhood guidelines I'd followed, showing that I had researched, complied, and acted responsibly. Some board members nodded, as if my reasoning made sense on a surface level. Others, however, crossed their arms and frowned, their expressions tight and unyielding. I could feel their judgment like a physical weight, pressing down on me with every word I spoke. The room was quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that makes you question every sentence you just said. And then, without warning, came the kicker. One of the older board members leaned forward, steepling his fingers and delivering the words that made my stomach drop. "You have to remove it. It blocks access for the neighborhood. Rules are rules." I felt a mixture of frustration and disbelief surge through me. I had expected pushback, perhaps some negotiation, but this was absolute. No discussion, no compromise suggested, just a flat, uncompromising demand. I tried to maintain my composure, but inside, my mind raced. Blocks access. I thought, the gate has never prevented anyone from entering or leaving. It's wide enough, it opens easily, and nothing about it restricts traffic. How can this be considered a violation? I quickly realized that arguing further would be futile. The board was not in the mood to reason. They were armed with authority, a rigid interpretation of the rules, and the power to enforce penalties if I didn't comply. I understood. In that moment, that forceful insistence alone wouldn't get me anywhere. This wasn't about presenting facts or logic. It was about strategy, diplomacy, and creativity. If I wanted to keep my gate, I needed a smarter approach, one that showed the HOA I was willing to respect the community while also protecting my family and my property. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a few seconds to observe the room. Their demeanor had shifted subtly. Some seemed impatient, as if my explanations were already too long. Others were silently waiting, arms crossed, eyes assessing me like a test I hadn't studied for. That's when it hit me. This was not just a conversation. It was a negotiation disguised as a confrontation. They were testing me, trying to see whether I would crumble under pressure or find a way to present a solution that aligned with their authority without surrendering my own rights. I began to think through my options carefully. I could simply comply and remove the gate, but that would be a loss on multiple levels, financially, emotionally, and practically. My family's security would be compromised. Weeks of effort and planning would vanish, and I would have learned that fairness and reason hold no weight against bureaucratic power. On the other hand, I could argue endlessly, but I could feel that spiraling path leading only to frustration, resentment, and possibly fines. The key, I realized, was a solution that addressed the HOA's concern, community access, while still preserving the purpose and integrity of the gate. I visualized potential compromises, maybe a code access system for neighbors, an intercom for deliveries, or some kind of emergency override for public safety vehicles. Anything that demonstrated flexibility and cooperation could shift their perception, but it needed to be presented thoughtfully, convincingly, and professionally. I needed to anticipate their objections, prepare for their skepticism, and show that this solution was mutually beneficial. By the end of the meeting, I had not won the argument, but I had gained something arguably more important: clarity. I understood exactly where the board stood and how rigid their interpretation of the rules was. I realized that brute force reasoning wouldn't work. What was required was ingenuity, persistence, and a plan that could not be dismissed. I left the room that day with my head held high, knowing that surrendering the gate was not an option, but also knowing that my next step needed to be smarter than anything I had done so far. Walking back to my car, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. The confrontation had revealed their position, and in doing so, it had also revealed a path forward. I wasn't just fighting for a gate anymore. I was fighting for principle, fairness, and my family's peace of mind. And I knew that if I approached the situation carefully, thoughtfully, and creatively, I could turn this conflict into an opportunity, not just to keep the gate, but to demonstrate that reason, compromise, and innovation could win even against rigid authority. In that moment, a quiet resolve settled over me. This wasn't just a fight about rules. It was a test of ingenuity, courage, and persistence. And I was ready to meet it head-on. I went home that night feeling a mixture of exhaustion, frustration, and determination. The confrontation with the HOA had left me emotionally drained, but as I closed the front door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, I realized something important. Giving up the gate was not an option. This wasn't just about metal and locks. It was about my family's safety, the aesthetics of our home, and standing up for what I believed was right. I knew the HOA wanted community access, but I also knew there had to be a way to satisfy them without sacrificing everything I had worked for. That night, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad, determined to find a solution that would meet both sides' needs. I started brainstorming, jotting down every possible idea that came to mind. At first, it felt overwhelming. There were so many factors to consider: accessibility, safety, cost, feasibility, and aesthetics. How could I make the gate community-friendly without compromising its original purpose? I spent hours thinking about every angle. Finally, a concept began to take shape. Instead of tearing the gate down, I would upgrade it. Not just a simple modification, but a smart, innovative upgrade that would transform the gate into something both secure and inclusive. The first improvement I planned was a keypad entry system. This would allow approved neighbors to enter the property without needing me to physically open the gate for them. It wasn't just about convenience. It was a tangible way to provide community access in a controlled, safe manner. I envisioned a system where each authorized resident would have a personal code, granting them entry while keeping the gate locked for everyone else. That way, the neighborhood could still feel welcome, and the HOA's concern about access would be addressed. It was a small adjustment, but it carried a powerful message. I was willing to compromise, but on my terms, preserving the safety of my family. Next, I decided to install a small intercom system. This way, any neighbor or visitor could request access if needed, without having to wait for me to come to the gate. I imagined a scenario where someone from the community had a legitimate reason to enter. They could simply press a button, speak to me or another household member, and gain access immediately. The intercom was an elegant solution because it maintained my family's privacy while simultaneously creating a sense of inclusion. It was a feature that no one could claim undermined community access because it literally allowed communication and controlled entry. I didn't stop there. I thought about emergency situations and realized that the HOA might be concerned about how fire trucks, ambulances, or other emergency vehicles would navigate the gate. To address that, I installed a sensor system that automatically opened the gate for authorized emergency vehicles. This wasn't just a technological upgrade. It was a strategic move to preemptively address any possible objections the HOA might raise. I wanted to demonstrate that the gate wasn't a barrier. It was a safeguard that could adapt intelligently to different scenarios. By the time I finished planning, the gate had transformed from a simple security feature into a sophisticated, multifunctional system. The next week, I invited the HOA board to my house to see the upgraded gate in action. I remember feeling nervous as I waited for them to arrive, but also quietly confident. I had done my homework, anticipated their concerns, and now had a solution that was both practical and creative. When they arrived, I walked them through every feature, demonstrating the keypad entry, showing them the intercom, and explaining the sensor system for emergency vehicles. I wanted them to see that this wasn't just a compromise. It was a complete improvement, one that respected both the community's needs and my family's rights. As I explained each feature, I could sense a change in the room. Their skepticism began to soften. Questions that initially sounded accusatory, like, "How does this allow neighbors access?" were now met with clear, concrete answers. I demonstrated how easy it was for an approved resident to enter using the keypad, how the intercom allowed real-time communication for visitors, and how the emergency sensor could respond instantly to authorized vehicles. Each feature addressed a specific concern they had raised, and it was impossible to argue against logic, practicality, and safety. By the end of the demonstration, the room had shifted from tension to curiosity, and finally, to admiration. I could see some of the board members nodding subtly, impressed by the thoughtful planning and technical execution. One of them even commented, "This actually solves the problem in a way we didn't expect." I smiled inwardly, knowing that I had turned a confrontation into an opportunity to showcase innovation, problem-solving, and compromise. It was a victory not through stubbornness, but through intelligence, strategy, and creativity. Finally, after a long discussion and careful consideration, the HOA board reached their decision. To my relief and slight surprise, they approved the gate. My upgraded system not only satisfied their concern for community access, but also exceeded their expectations in terms of safety, aesthetics, and functionality. The tension that had weighed on me for weeks lifted in that moment, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just about winning a dispute. It was about proving that challenges could be met with creativity, and that compromise didn't always mean surrender. That experience taught me something valuable. By thinking outside the box and approaching the problem with a solutions-oriented mindset, I had turned a potentially stressful and expensive conflict into a triumph. The gate was no longer just a security feature. It was a symbol of ingenuity, persistence, and the power of proactive problem-solving. It was proof that when faced with seemingly rigid rules and uncompromising authority, there's always room for creativity and compromise, if you're willing to think strategically. Walking back into my house that evening, I looked at the gate with a renewed sense of pride. What had once been a source of anxiety and conflict had become a testament to determination, innovation, and the courage to stand firm while remaining flexible. The gate wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a story, a victory, and a lesson for both me and the neighborhood about what's possible when you refuse to settle for the easy way out. After the HOA finally approved the upgraded gate, life began to settle back into a comfortable rhythm, but the effects of what I had done rippled far beyond my own family. My neighbors noticed the changes immediately. Some walked by my house just to get a closer look, curious about the keypad entry, the intercom, and the emergency access sensors. Others simply stopped me on the street to compliment the design, saying how it improved the look of the property while still feeling welcoming. One neighbor even asked, "Where did you get this done? I've been thinking about adding something similar for months." Hearing that, I felt a surge of pride, not just in the gate itself, but in how the solution I had created was being recognized as thoughtful, practical, and beneficial for everyone. It was amazing to see how one small conflict had sparked interest and dialogue in the community. People began asking questions not only about the technology and design of the gate, but also about the reasoning behind it. I explained, with enthusiasm, how I had approached the problem creatively, thinking about both family safety and community access. The conversation shifted from curiosity to admiration as I described how the gate allowed neighbors to enter safely using a personal code, how the intercom ensured communication, and how emergency vehicles could pass through automatically. Residents were inspired, not because I had defied the HOA, but because I had found a solution that respected rules while also serving a higher purpose: safety, convenience, and aesthetics. The HOA, surprisingly, also took notice of the impact. After seeing the results, they began to use my upgraded gate as an example in meetings and newsletters. They highlighted how residents could follow the neighborhood rules without sacrificing their personal security or the value of their property. Suddenly, what had started as a tense conflict became a teaching moment for the entire community. It was as if my efforts had created a new blueprint for problem solving within the HOA. Thoughtful planning, creativity, and communication could bridge gaps between rules and practical needs. I never expected that a disagreement would turn into a model for positive change, but it did, and it was immensely gratifying to witness. In addition to the recognition, there was a tangible shift in the neighborhood's energy. People were more engaged, discussing ways to improve their own home safely, thinking about security measures without making their spaces feel closed off or unwelcoming. I started noticing small changes. Another neighbor installed a keypad access gate inspired by mine, while others upgraded their own security systems after talking with me about the options. Conversations about community safety became constructive rather than critical. It was a transformation, not just for my house, but for the way the neighborhood approached security and community access. What had started as a stressful conflict turned into an opportunity for growth, collaboration, and mutual understanding. Reflecting on this experience, I realized how much it taught me about negotiation, problem-solving, and resilience. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't mean being stubborn or confrontational. It means thinking smarter, anticipating potential objections, and crafting a solution that works for everyone. It's about balancing personal needs with communal responsibilities, creating a compromise that doesn't diminish your values. I had learned that resistance doesn't have to be destructive. It can be constructive, transforming a potential battle into an opportunity to innovate and inspire. There was also a personal lesson in confidence and perseverance. For weeks, I had felt powerless, worried that the HOA's authority would force me to undo all my efforts. But instead of succumbing to fear, I allowed myself to think creatively and take control of the situation. The sense of empowerment that came from designing a solution that addressed everyone's concerns was indescribable. It wasn't just about the gate. It was about realizing that I could face seemingly insurmountable challenges and come out stronger, wiser, and more resourceful. The experience instilled a sense of pride and resilience that extended far beyond the physical structure of my home. Even friends outside the neighborhood took notice. When I shared the story, they were amazed that a confrontation with an HOA could end positively. They asked questions about how I had handled the stress, how I had anticipated objections, and how I had maintained composure under pressure. It became a story not just about a gate, but about creative problem-solving, patience, and strategic thinking. People were inspired to face their own challenges with a similar mindset, analyzing the situation, understanding the perspectives of others, and finding solutions that satisfy multiple interests without compromising core values. Over time, I came to appreciate the broader impact of the gate. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when logic, creativity, and communication intersect. It reminded me that conflicts don't always have to end in compromise that feels like a loss. They can end in solutions that benefit everyone involved. My family enjoyed peace of mind, my neighbors felt included, and the HOA had a practical example to reference in the future. What had seemed like a stressful, even frightening situation transformed into a story of collaboration, innovation, and positive change. And perhaps the most important takeaway was this: when faced with challenges, especially those imposed by authority or rules that seem rigid, it's essential to approach the problem strategically rather than reactively. Fear, frustration, or anger rarely yield results. Thinking critically, exploring creative solutions, and remaining patient can turn a conflict into an opportunity. That's exactly what happened with my gate. The story didn't end in tension or fines. It ended in community engagement, improved safety, and personal growth. Looking back, I realized that the gate itself was almost secondary to what I had learned. The experience had taught me about standing firm while staying flexible, about solving problems instead of simply reacting to rules, and about the power of creative thinking in turning obstacles into opportunities. It was a lesson I would carry with me far beyond the walls of my home and the boundaries of my neighborhood. And every time I see my family walking safely through that gate, or a neighbor stopping to admire it, I'm reminded that sometimes challenges don't just test you. They shape you, inspire change, and create opportunities that no one could have imagined at the outset. The biggest lesson I learned from this experience is simple but powerful. Know your rights, trust your instincts, and get creative when facing unfair rules. Compliance doesn't always mean giving up what's important. Sometimes the best way to win is to find a solution that turns a conflict into an opportunity. So, if you ever feel cornered by rules, restrictions, or unexpected challenges, don't panic. Take a step back, think strategically, and maybe, just maybe, you can turn a problem into a victory story. That's exactly what I did with my gate, and it changed the way I think about challenges forever.